This is a presentation by Nikki Gio from the City of Vancouver on maintaining private stormwater facilities for contractors. City of Vancouver, Clark County, City of Camas, Washougal, Battleground, and Ridgefield are all part of the Stormwater Partners, and this is a project that we are offering to provide residents and contractors with information about how to maintain stormwater facilities properly. So Nikki, I'll pass it over to you.
All right, thanks, Eric. Yeah, so my name is Nikki Gio, and I'm with the City of Vancouver. I'm an environmental scientist in their stormwater program and been with the city for about 6 years now, but I have a lot of background in private facility maintenance, and so wanted to share some resources here for the Stormwater Partners on stormwater private facility maintenance, specifically for contractors. So we'll go over a little bit of stormwater background, some specific facility maintenance, and then we'll talk about contractor bids as well. So the first thing to talk about is, what is stormwater? What do we mean when we're talking about stormwater? And we are talking really about all the precipitation that falls from the sky that runs down roofs and driveways. So everything is included in stormwater. We're really looking at all kinds of, in the Northwest, all kinds of rain, including snow and different seasonal forms. But we're really interested in stormwater in particular as it moves across the urban landscape. There we go. So here is an image, kind of a before and after, and this is a real parcel in the city of Vancouver, kind of on the east side of Vancouver, where you can see the forested condition. So this is before development, and then the current condition, which is a just average neighborhood. So you can see the houses and driveways, patios and pools, and all of the water that would be soaked up in the forest during a rainfall or snow event is running off these hard surfaces in the urban environment. So we generate a lot more stormwater runoff in the current built out condition than when the same area of land was a forest. So that's where we're looking at, where does stormwater come from? It comes from all these hard surfaces in our neighborhoods, cities, and towns. And why do we care about stormwater? Well, there are regulations governing stormwater. So there are federal, state, and local ordinances that require stormwater to be managed, treated. There's the Clean Water Act at the federal level. The state issues stormwater municipal permits, and then most cities have a local ordinance. So there are several layers of regulation. But really what we're talking about is we want to prevent the degradation of our water bodies. So when that stormwater is coming down, and rather than soaking into the forest, it's running off the roads and roofs and driveways, we could have degradation of our streams and creeks and rivers, which we have seen. In Clark County, we have impairments on a lot of our waterways. So that's a big reason we care about stormwater. It's a lot of times carrying pollutants directly to water bodies, and we want to prevent that degradation. Stormwater also can cause property damage and local flooding. If the stormwater is running off the roofs and driveways and roads and can't get into the storm drains and pipes quickly enough, we might have property damage, streets flooded, water over road signs, that kind of thing. So that's another big reason we care about stormwater, is managing those flows. And then just preserving the beauty of our local waterways. The stormwater is trying to get to those receiving waters as soon as possible, and sometimes those flows can be erosive and damaging. So we would really want to preserve our local waterways, and some of our stormwater systems tie into the drinking water aquifer too. So we'll talk a little bit about that. One thing we really want to emphasize is that stormwater is not going to a treatment plant. So that's kind of a common misconception. The city of Portland has a lot of combined sewer systems where the stormwater mixes with residential sewage and goes to a treatment plant. But in Clark County, we have separate systems. So stormwater is carrying pollutants when it's washing off the roofs and driveways and roadways. It's carrying things like soil, fertilizers, pesticides, little oil leaks and drips that are along the public roads. Stormwater is picking up that material and washing it into our creeks and streams. So it really is a big contributor of pollution to our local water bodies. And especially, the Columbia River and Vancouver Lake, if you think about on the scale of how much stormwater is going directly into those large bodies of water, it can contribute a lot of pollution. It's washing off a lot of areas and going into those water bodies. Storm drains may also connect to the drinking water aquifer. And sometimes that's with or without treatment, depending on how shallow the drinking water is, but definitely a concern for us here in Clark County. And the main issues when we're looking at property damage and local flooding, the stormwater is going to carry everything with it. And sometimes that looks like leaves and trash and soil that can clog pipes. Sometimes it's just that the flow is coming off too fast and, can't get into those storm drains quickly enough. But it can cause safety issues and concerns with property damage. The picture on the right here is showing standing water right up against a house foundation. So that's just in a regular rain event, not an extreme rain event. But we do get a lot of stormwater generated on just regular neighborhood land use. And so it can really cause a lot of flooding. And because the amount of hard surface that we have, flash flooding can be an issue, where we have a lot of runoff that's coming very quickly off of hard surfaces. It can really degrade habitats for fish and damage their breeding grounds. So it's definitely a big issue for us here in Clark County. And a lot of our local waterways are focus areas for our parks. We have trails, we have all kinds of different scenic interest in our waterways. They're valuable parts of our community, and trails can be washed away. We can have algae blooms that cause issues, and so a lot of our parks and trails, are really closely connected to water quality, and that is related back to preventing pollution from stormwater. So protecting that vegetation and habitat, reducing that flash flooding and those big heavy runoff events helps protect our parks and trails. And preserving our waterways is an important value to most of our communities. In Clark County, there's parks and trails in almost every city around water bodies, around Lacamas Lake or up in Ridgefield. Vancouver has a new big waterfront park. And so we really value these waterways. They're really important to our communities, and we want to make sure we're doing what we can to protect them. And here are a couple of maps just talking about the drinking water sources in Clark County. So we do have primarily a sole source aquifer, which means, we're all kind of getting water out of the same bathtub. It's kind of how we like to explain it. So there's an inset map here of the city of Vancouver with our drinking water stations. You can see we have a number of drinking water stations. So, we have the aquifer is reaching across the whole city limits. And then as we look at Clark County, we have, widespread distribution of drinking water sources. So protecting the water quality in those areas is really important to drinking water and providing potable water for our communities. So what we're doing to try to prevent pollution to our waterways and our aquifers and, prevent those flooding issues is installing private stormwater facilities. So when a new development goes in, they have stormwater facilities to manage and treat the stormwater that's coming off of those roofs and driveways and parking lots and commercial areas. And the maintenance of those facilities falls to the private property owner. So in many of our local cities and in the county, the owners of the private stormwater systems are responsible for that ongoing maintenance. And that's whether it's just a treatment swale, like this one on the left here, pretty low tech grass swale, or The picture on the right is a bioretention cell, which is a engineered soil matrix and a little more complexity. But these are common types of private facilities that do require maintenance, and that it comes at the responsibility of the private property owner. So some different kinds of stormwater facilities you might see out in the landscape. A couple of these are commercial and a couple of these are residential applications, but facilities you can see on the surface. So you can visually go out to the site and you say, oh, there's a swale. So bottom right, there's a swale. That's a grassy swale in behind a kind of a box store. Visually very easy to see. That's where the water goes, and it's this kind of low area in the landscape. Swales are typically a flat bottom. They vary in width, but they're typically grass and, you know, just a few components, maybe a sediment trap, maybe a flow spreader, but visually very easy to locate in the landscape. The bioretention cells, like I mentioned, the top photo here is another kind of a long, skinny bioretention cell, but they have an engineered soil matrix and this kind of more of a garden planting, very common with the bioretention. Stormwater ponds, of course, they're kind of more rare in the city, but maybe in different neighborhoods, kind of handling runoff from large subdivisions. Permeable pavers can look like a lot of different materials, but they're typically on the surface. So these are modular concrete pavers in the top left, and those are common in residential and commercial uses. You don't see them quite as often in commercial because they don't have the same kind of load-bearing capabilities, but this is along a parking area at a public park. And then we have vegetated filter strips, and we also have compost amended filter strips. So that's kind of this bottom left photo where you're seeing just the rock up against the driveway. That could be a filter strip. You know, could be, if it was grass, it would be a vegetated filter strip, or it could be a compost amended filter strip. So, you know, it can look like the stormwater facilities can look like a variety of different forms, but these are things you can easily observe when you're visiting a site. Underground facilities, on the other hand, a little harder to figure out what's under that manhole. So these are facilities that are under the parking lot. They may have manholes that just all look alike, and they typically will have some kind of treatment or storage capability. So the top right photo is a filter vault, and those black circles are all different kinds of filters that the stormwater soaks into, and there's different brand names. So, you know, there isn't really just one kind. There's several different brands out there and different filter types. So they have different combinations of filter media in those containers. But the idea is that the stormwater comes off of the paved hard surface, goes through that filter, and then comes out on the other side in the pipe system cleaner. So these systems oftentimes are not visible from the surface, but they do require frequent maintenance. They accumulate sediment and trash, and the filters have to be replaced. They get exhausted from having the stormwater kind of flush through. And so those can be, the filters can be attached to catch basins. You know, you have a storm drain with just a couple of filters. You might have a manhole with 3 or 4 filters, or a vault, something like this photo. I've seen vaults up to 25 filters. So there's a lot of variety, but once you kind of get keyed into looking for them in parking lots, you'll notice them more and more. Underground detention and infiltration are harder to see. There may only be manholes and cleanouts, but this image here on the left is showing from a plan view what the detention system might look like. So these are runs of horizontal pipe that store water under the parking lot. So when you're standing on the parking lot, you may just see this manhole on the north side, but under all that pavement is this storage pipe that's holding the water, and it may be holding it and just metering it out. You know, detention is where we're just holding the water so it doesn't flash flood downstream. Underground infiltration, that pipe may be perforated, or it may have a rock base where the water is just soaking in. So again, not something you're going to visually see in the parking lot, but can be a really big component of the stormwater treatment at a given facility, and they do require maintenance. Both of those detention and infiltration systems, if they get clogged up with sediment or leaves, they really do need to be cleaned out. So it's a big part of looking at private facility maintenance is those underground facilities. And then dry wells, very common in the city of Vancouver to have dry wells. This photo on the bottom right is a dry well. And you can see there's just holes in this vertical concrete tube. So pretty low tech, but they do get clogged with trash, sediment, debris, anything that's coming through the storm drain itself can clog up this dry well. And if it gets clogged, you can vacuum it out to some extent, but routine maintenance will really help preserve the life of that and make sure that the stormwater can just soak into the ground around the dry well. See if my slides will, here we go. So some common maintenance issues, and this is really talking about surface facilities, the ones we can see, but that may apply to underground in some cases. Primarily weeds are a big maintenance issue. So this photo on the right is the Himalayan blackberry growing in a swale. Not uncommon to see this. Blackberry can take over a grassy area in pretty short time frame and can be really tough to maintain. So weeds are a big part of private facility maintenance. And then trash, just regular, cups and bottles and packaging that gets washed down a storm drain. Soil erosion, this picture on the left, you can see there's just been the slope next to this swale has been exposed, and as the rain is carrying the water down the slope, it's just eroding that soil around the sediment trap. So bare soils are a big problem in private stormwater facilities and something we see very commonly. And then this photo on the bottom, missing plantings. It can be hard to get plants established in a bioretention cell, especially if there's, you get a hot summer. The engineered soil mix is often sandy, so you can have a lot of plant mortality. And missing plants, keeping the plant density that we need to keep the stormwater treatment value of these facilities can be really challenging. So sometimes there's flexibility with changing the types of plants, but missing plants is a pretty common issue that we see in private stormwater facilities. So how to inspect private facilities, and this is really important because the primary requirement in most cities is inspection every year, annual inspection, and maintenance as needed. So it's hard to say what kind of maintenance a facility is going to need if we don't know what the site conditions are. If a parking lot's really clean, if you have a minimal amount of trash and no exposed soils, maintenance may only be required in a private facility infrequently, maybe every 2 or 3 years. If you have something that land use like a gas station or grocery store where you've got a lot of people coming in and out, you may have more trash, you may see more issues with erosion. So it's inspection is the basic requirement, and then maintenance is needed based on site conditions. So understanding how to inspect private facilities is the first step. And we really want to encourage people to find the engineering plans that go along with that facility. All of the private facilities are going to have some kind of engineering plan. There may not be a lot of documentation available, a sheet or two, but it's really important to refer back to those approved plans before you do any sort of work on a facility and to determine the inspection outcome. So this bottom example is just your regular grass swale. It's got a cross section on the left that shows that flat bottom, 4 feet wide. It's got the 4-to-1 gentle slopes. This whole facility should be grass. It should be, pretty easy to mow. When you look on the right side, you can see that there's outfall rock in this plan view looking down on the swale. And that rock is really important for preventing erosion in the facility. So when you're looking at these approved plans, you want to pick out those components that should be there. Are you looking for a trash rack? Are you looking for rock? Are you looking for pipes that go in, pipes that come out? You want to be familiar with these components when you go to do an inspection so that you have that basis to say, okay, what should be here? What am I looking for? What should be here? And then you can say, well, what's missing? What's damaged? What work needs to be done? And plantings are a really big part of bioretention. These kind of biofiltration swales, it's a sod, turf type grass, pretty straightforward. But when you're looking at something like bioretention or even a stormwater pond, they can have pretty complicated planting plans. So if you can find the approved plan set, refer back to these planting plans. You can see this example that we have. There's 3 different planting schemes. So it depends on which facility you're looking at, what the inspection results would be, that you're comparing back to the approved plans. And with anything, these plantings, or if you have a structure that's damaged, if there's modifications that are needed, that may be acceptable, but they just have to be approved by the jurisdiction, the city or county that you're in. It's not to say if you have this biofiltration swale, that's the only thing you can ever have in that area, that you're stuck with it. But you do need to come in for modifications, and that includes things like tree plantings, installing additional rock. We see a lot of biofiltration swales with additional rock placed around the pipes or on the slopes. And those kind of changes need to be approved, as well as something like bioretention plantings. If you're having trouble establishing the plants in a bioretention cell, if you're going out there missing a lot of those plantings, you may be able to change them out. You just need to get approval before doing that. So here are some typical types of maintenance. I just want to touch a little bit more in detail on these typical maintenance activities that we would see. So one is the biofiltration swales, very common in the city of Vancouver, very common across the Stormwater Partners area in Clark County. So here is kind of on the bottom right here, kind of a colored drawing showing that cross section like the approved plans showed. A flat bottom's maybe 4 foot wide. We've got the grass, we've got these 4-to-1 slopes, nice gentle slopes. So this is kind of what we're looking for out in the field. And so mowing and weed control are really important in these facilities, especially if they're on the backside of a commercial property or up against a fence line. Things like blackberry and invasive weeds can be a big problem. So mowing and weed control are really important types of maintenance. And you want to have somebody checking these facilities for trash and debris, especially during the rainy season, maybe 3 or 4 times a year. This photo at the top shows this kind of pool, and this is a sediment trap. So you'll see trash and debris collected in there after heavy rain events, and it's easier to clean that up, if you go out there a few times a year rather than trying to go out just once, in the warmer season. If you have somebody that's already doing mowing type maintenance, it may be easy to just have them check the trash rack as well. And less often, but still important, is cleaning out the sediment traps or curb openings, depending on how your swale is configured. Soil may be washing off the parking lots or landscaping areas, and these sediment traps are meant to catch that material and just be shoveled out. So that makes it really easy. If you get sediment if the sediment trap fills up and the sediment gets past the metal flow spreader here, it's really hard to get out of the grass. So you want to have somebody looking at your sediment traps or curb openings and just being able to shovel those out periodically, maybe once a year, depending on your site conditions again. And then some things to look for, some indicators of maintenance issues with the swale. Standing water, if you have standing water past 48 hours, that's a big indicator that there's an issue with the swale that needs to be addressed. If you do have bare soils, we should have this nice flat bottom, a flat across bottom, and these gentle slopes, so we shouldn't be seeing bare soils. If you are seeing that, or a channel cutting down one side, maybe can be an indication that there's sediment accumulated in the swale and it needs regrading. So, and those are less frequent maintenance activities. Cleaning out the sediment traps, I would say once a year. If you have to remove sediment in the swale, if you're having standing water issues, I would say those are probably on a timeline of like 5 to 8 years. You shouldn't be seeing those in new swales, but they are common types of maintenance issues in biofiltration swales. Stormwater ponds are a little more complicated. There's a few more moving parts. So this bottom right picture shows a kind of a colored drawing of a two-stage pond with a first wet pool that collects sediment, a berm or baffle that divides the two areas, and then a larger storage pool downstream. So there are more components here than your typical biofiltration swale. But the maintenance tasks are very similar. You want to have somebody that's checking for trash and debris a few times in the wet season. So 3 or 4 times during the wet season, just go check the pools, check the pipes, look at your approved plans, make sure you don't have any clogging or bridging. This is especially common in ponds where you have cattails or other vegetation along the banks. If you get a high flow rain event, they can kind of bridge over the outlet pipes and block them. So you want to have somebody who's doing routine trash and debris checks. You want to be on the lookout for any kinds of leaks or blockages, especially at the outlets and spillways, because that's where, if you're getting flood control from a pond, which is typically what we're seeing, they're carrying a lot of volume of water. The last thing you want is to have, something that's blocking a spillway, trees that have grown in your spillway. So in this colored drawing in the bottom left, there's kind of a gravel spillway shown there in the left-hand corner. And that's where if you got to, a flash flood event, you need water to be able to get out of that spillway. So you want to make sure there aren't trees growing there. There isn't like a picnic table someone put there. You just want to make sure that all of those components are open and free flowing. We really encourage folks that have ponds to keep an eye out for trees, things like willows, that can grow really fast. They can cause leaks on pond berms. So this berm that's in the middle, may be a pretty ideal place for a set of willows to grow, but the willow roots may undermine that berm and cause leaking between the two pools. So we really encourage folks with ponds to keep an eye out for trees and remove those volunteer trees that come in. Invasive weeds, again, things like the Himalayan blackberry, just depending on your site, especially if the pond is on a property line or a fence line, invasive species can take over really quickly. So we want to make sure that you're maintaining those and keeping those at bay. And then again, at that every maybe 5 to 8 year frequency, removing sediment, especially in this first pool. In this diagram, that first pool is meant to accumulate sediment. It's meant to kind of take the brunt of the dirty parts of the stormwater, and that will need to be removed periodically. There could be a planting plan for wetland plants. There may not be. It just kind of depends on the design of the facility. So you want to be keeping an eye out for that. And in terms of maintenance, planning for it, budgeting for it, making sure that it's included in your scope if you're going to be doing a long-term maintenance contract on a pond. Sediment removal is a very common type of maintenance. Permeable pavements. So there's a lot of different kinds of permeable pavement. And, they all have their own little maintenance quirks and challenges, but really the common maintenance issue is sweeping the surface. And we really try to encourage with a dry broom, especially to remove moss and loose debris. That kind of sweeping helps keep the pervious part of the pavement open. So like the top image here on the left is showing some moss and kind of landscape debris that's accumulated in these pavers. And going through routinely with a dry broom, it will be enough to keep those pores open. You go through in the summer when the moss is kind of dried out and you sweep up this dry debris and just keep those joints open, because if they're left, they can accumulate sediment and clog the pavement. The photo on the right shows kind of the after image when they've done some cleanup of those same pavers. In this case, when you're sweeping out routinely between the solid pavers, you may need to refill the aggregate. So there's like a little fine bit of rock in between those pavers, and it'll need to be refilled if you're sweeping out debris routinely. That's a common kind of issue, and it helps to keep the pavement structurally sound. You really want the rock in between the individual little pavers so that you get that structural integrity that you need. This bottom right picture is talking about, if you have broken units, or in this case, they had a confining edge. This black plastic was holding the concrete pavers in their unit. It's gotten broken, and that's not uncommon, especially with turning traffic. If you have, like, this is a side parking area in a commercial setting, people are backing into those spots and trying to parallel park on those pavers. It causes a lot of torsion on the concrete and breaks that edging. So they just need to be reset. They need to be refilled. It's something to kind of keep an eye out, especially with these modular systems. You can see these are on the bottom right. These are modular concrete pavers. They do need maintenance to keep them together, to keep them kind of working as one solid unit. The edging is a big part of that. And then this bottom photo is showing porous asphalt. So asphalt, it may just look like asphalt. It may just look like regular black asphalt. But if it's pervious, you can't seal coat it. So that may seem obvious, but if pervious asphalt is seal coated, it effectively blocks the rain from getting underneath. And most sites that have porous asphalt will have a pretty big storage layer underneath, so you're losing a lot of that capacity. Porous asphalt will tend to look more gray. It doesn't have that fresh, crisp, black asphalt look to it. So if you're out on a site that has kind of a gray, more worn looking asphalt, it could be pervious. So you want to keep that in mind. And with all of these pavement systems, we're looking for standing water. They should be draining off, and water should be infiltrating them with no problem. If you're seeing ponding along curb lines, ponding along, parking islands, stuff like that, that's an indication that maintenance is needed, and it may need to include something like a vacuum sweeper, or just depending on the type of pavement that you have, like these modular pavers may need to be replaced. You may need to do some full depth replacement on those. But permeable pavements, there's a lot of different products out there. There's a lot of different brands and materials. So these maintenance issues are pretty common, but something to keep in mind when you're looking at stormwater control specifically. And underground facilities, of course, there's a lot of different kinds of products and name brands and systems that are available. So it's hard to say definitively what is the one set of maintenance requirements. Each manufacturer defines their own maintenance requirements. And so we really encourage folks to find their name brand maintenance manual. You a lot of times can go on their websites, but each one has a little different requirement. So make sure if you're working on maintenance for those facilities, you're familiar with that system type. And we really recommend that private property owners don't self-perform underground facility maintenance because of confined space issues, just a risk and safety there. So we really recommend working with a contractor. You can kind of see the scale of these filters with the people in these photos. The previous photo I showed, they kind of just look like all black circles in a vault, but you can see standing next to a person, they're pretty good sized. So we really recommend a contractor working on those, somebody that's got, vacuum equipment, winch equipment, that they can get those filters out easily. We don't want to have, somebody's maintenance manager or facilities manager down in a vault trying to get these filters cleaned out, and some of them can be damaged if they're not properly maintained. Some of the contact storm filters are threaded into the floor, some just pop off. So you really don't want to try doing these as a DIY maintenance. You really want to make sure you've got a contractor that's familiar with that system type. A lot of the work with these filters is, of course, replacing the filters with their name brand custom filter types. And that a lot of times involves vacuum trucks and jetting. and then the filter material has to be properly disposed of. So it depends what kind of filter material you have, but there can be expenses with that, just depending if that filter media can be refurbished, or if you're taking out the whole units, maybe you can take those back to the manufacturer. You want to be familiar with those before you get started. This schematic on the left side is showing, that there is a sediment chamber in the front, and then there's the vault with the filters in it. So there could be one manhole over the sediment trap that needs to be vacuumed out, in addition to sediment that may accumulate in the filter vault itself. So it's just really important to make sure you've got the plans that go with that system, and keep in mind that these filters they're just a huge variety. There's a lot of different manufacturers out there. So one thing we want to talk about is planning for maintenance. And, as contractors, you may be thinking about this when you're putting together, a multi-year performance contract, or looking to scope out a maintenance agreement. We really want to see routine maintenance. It's annual inspection and then maintenance as needed, but that should be on a routine basis. So for private property owners, we encourage them to use something like this log. That's the top image here on the right-hand side. And it just goes through, what was the inspection date and what were some of the maintenance issues. It doesn't require a whole lot of technical detail. It's just documenting for the property owner they're meeting that burden of annual inspection, maintenance as required, keeping records of inspection and maintenance. If there's blackberries that need removed or sediment that needs removed, it's really important to include documentation back to the owner. So if you're bidding out something like that, make sure you're including those records so that the property owner is still aware of their record keeping back to the agency, the city or county that oversees that. It's really helpful to assign someone to manage the maintenance if you can. Have kind of like a project manager or contract manager that is really looking at that site and coordinating those maintenance activities. And having a copy of the approved plans is just paramount. It's so important because each facility is different. Each design can be a little unique snowflake. And so you want to make sure that you're looking at what are the plans for this site. There is a guidance document from the Department of Ecology on what they call low impact development facilities. So that includes the bioretention, the pervious pavers, those kinds of facilities. So if you have questions, what should I scope? What should I put in my bid? You can check out this guidance document. It's available online for free. And it has maintenance tables for each of these facilities with recommended frequencies of maintenance. It's a really good resource when you're thinking about planning for private stormwater facility maintenance. You can kind of project out, a year or 3 years, what kind of maintenance might be needed. It even goes through some of the tools that might be needed for certain activities. So it's a really good resource specifically on maintenance for private stormwater facilities. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the misconceptions we see in stormwater facilities, some of the confusion that we hear oftentimes. Once you see the stormwater facility, you see the swale, you see the pond, maybe that seems pretty straightforward, but sometimes stormwater facilities are not very visible. Underground facilities, this example is pervious concrete. And, we may go out as a city or a local agency and say, hey, property owner, you've got stormwater facilities. Where are your inspection records? What does your maintenance look like? So in this case, the private property owner may not think of this as a stormwater facility, but like that cross section I showed of the pervious asphalt, there's a huge storage layer of rock under that pavement. So even though it doesn't look like this pavement is doing much, it may be storing a lot of water underneath. And so it's really important to think about when you're putting together a maintenance contract, even a landscape maintenance contract, if you're even just looking at cleaning out the storm drains maintenance, that there may be stormwater facilities on that site that aren't really obvious. And you want to be looking for the approved plans, finding the records to understand that most private facilities, especially commercial properties, are going to have stormwater facilities. So you've got to do some detective work sometimes to figure out what they are, where they are, what they're supposed to look like. A common misconception we hear is like, oh, that swale isn't ours. It's taken care of by the city, by the county, by WashDOT, by, someone else. And a lot of our stormwater facilities are along roadways because that's kind of where there's green space. So these are two examples of biofiltration swales that are along public roads, but they're privately owned and maintained. So that can be really confusing. And if you're looking to do contracting work for an apartment complex or a homeowners association, if you see these kind of green spaces adjacent to the road, you can't assume that they're public. And in fact, in the city of Vancouver, most of them are private. So it's definitely something you can call the city. You can reach out to us to confirm. But if you're scoping maintenance and you don't see the stormwater facilities interior to the site, they may be along the perimeter, along the public roads, and they may still be private. So keep an eye out for those. Another big misconception that's kind of similar that we get is, that's a natural area. This stormwater pond doesn't look like a stormwater facility. It looks like a natural area. And, from commercial owners and homeowners alike, we hear, we're not supposed to go in there. We don't touch the natural area, like it's some kind of pristine wetland area. But a lot of times they're constructed stormwater facilities and they require routine maintenance, ongoing routine maintenance. They may be adjacent to natural areas. They may even include a natural area, but there's still stormwater facilities that need that kind of routine, ongoing maintenance. So the image at the top here is showing a swale in a natural area. So there is a lot of tree cover. We ended up taking out some of these trees in the flow path, but this is kind of what that stormwater facility is going to look like. It's not going to be a sod swale. It's in this natural area. It's going to have a different look, but it's still doing the flood control and pollution removal that we're looking for. And this bottom picture is a stormwater pond. We really want to emphasize that it's not a natural area because stormwater facilities have to provide water quality treatment. We're looking for them to do a job. It's a working landscape. And that mentality that we stay out of it, we don't touch it, doesn't help the pond do its job. So in this case, they had, some blackberry in the facility. They had some trees on the banks. Those are just not really helping that facility do the work it was intended to do. And the investment that it was really put in there for is treating stormwater. So we need to get it working. And fences are not always a good indicator. So if you see a fence line, that doesn't necessarily mean keep out. It may be just delineating this as a stormwater facility. So in the case of this pond, there's an adjacent trail in a neighborhood area. The fence is not, keep out that this is a natural area. The fence is indicating this is the stormwater facility separate from the trail and the park. So don't assume if there's a fence that you have to stay out of it. Call the city or the county, see what information you can find about that site or that facility. One big issue we run into is sort of improvements to stormwater facilities. And so we get a variety of different things. Open space is at a premium in some of our communities, and a stormwater facility can be perceived as open space. Stormwater swale may look like a pet relief area. This golf tee is actually in a stormwater facility in a residential area. And I've seen playgrounds, I've seen picnic tables. We really want to make sure that in terms of maintenance, we're preventing a conflicting use in that stormwater facility. So the last thing we want is having pet waste in a stormwater swale, a biofiltration swale that's trying to treat the pollution from stormwater. These burn marks in the grass are from pet waste. It's using a pet relief area. That doesn't help us with water quality treatment. The disc golf tee is actually in pretty large biofiltration swale, but it could be subject to flash flooding. So we don't want people in there. We don't want children playing in it. It's just not safe. And then we see a lot of rock. This bottom example is a swale that has been lined with river rock cobbles, like nice looking rock, but most of our swales are supposed to be, biofiltration indicates grass. So they need to be grass. And if the grass is holding water, if you can't mow it, if it's ponding, if there's, issues with maintenance that prevent it from being treated as grass, rock is not the answer. Don't think, well, there's standing water, we'll fill it with rock, because then we're missing that treatment value of the grass soaking up some of those pollutants, some of those fertilizers and pesticides. And we have had issues with tree plantings. People see kind of a perimeter area that looks like it's open space and they want to put in tree plantings, and that can sometimes cause leaks like a pond, but they can also block flow. They can cause, issues with the swale grade. If the roots grow out into the swale, you end up with weird ponding. So we really discourage tree plantings in stormwater facilities, unless there is, ample room for them. But that's sort of an improvement pitfall that we see, is that people think, well, look at this open area, we could have trees. Maybe not. So it's best to check before you do that planting. So some tips for putting a bid together, and these are just general tips, not too specific, but just something we want to think about. Average swale maintenance, so that biofiltration swale, just regular grass type swale, pretty inexpensive for annual maintenance. We estimated around 5 to 10% of the capital costs. They're pretty inexpensive to build. And so when you're looking at weed control and mowing, pretty inexpensive. But if you look at something like bioretention, there may be an establishment period where you put small plants in. They need to be watered. There needs to be weeding, mulch cover. Those add to cost. And so you really want to be thinking about what is the type of facility, what is the expectation of what's supposed to be there, and incorporating that into your bid. If you get a copy of the approved plans, you identify those components, the pipes, the sediment traps, those structural components. When you go out to do an inspection, if there's damage, if there's repair that's needed, maybe a sediment trap the grate has been bent, maybe there's a ditch inlet where the grate has been clogged or broken, those add to maintenance costs. So when you're putting together a bid for private facility maintenance, you look at those approved plans and consider that structures are going to be an additional cost beyond just the plantings and mowing. Vegetation is going to be a critical component, whether it's a biofiltration swale, a pond, bioretention. Unless it's pervious pavement, plants are probably going to be included. And so you want to make sure you're following the approved plans. If you need a variance, if you need to use some other plant, if you need to change something out, you just need to contact the city or county. Underground facilities, when you're thinking about bidding that work out, if you don't have confined space training, you may need to sub out that part of the work. Maybe you're doing the swales and the landscaping, but you don't have the equipment to do the filter vaults or the catch basin filters. Make sure that you're getting a sub who's got that confined space and who's trained on that name brand system. So if you're going to combine services, just make sure you find somebody who's familiar with that name brand, knows where to get the filters, know what's required for the routine maintenance, and probably has a vacuum truck. For a lot of underground facilities, that's going to be kind of a standard piece of equipment. It's fine if you're putting together a bid and you don't have that equipment, but if you're going to sub it out, you want to make sure that you've got somebody who's prepared, not only for operating a vacuum truck, but then properly disposing of that material for you. So between, routine things like trash and debris, just things that wash off of a parking lot, maybe that's something you can pick up by hand. But if you're having to clean out sediment traps, if you're having to vacuum out a vault, that material has to be properly disposed of. And that includes parking lot sweeping too. So if you've got somebody that's doing sweeping as another part of maintenance for the site, that can keep a lot of debris out of the storm facilities, out of the catch basins and storm drains. But that material has to be properly disposed of. We really don't want to see you or any subs reusing the sediment that is in a sediment trap or comes out of a filter vault on the site. We don't want it in another landscaping bed. We don't want it up against the building. There's a lot of times there are oil leaks and drips in that material, and it can kill grass if you try to put it somewhere else. It can hurt trees if you try to put it in planting strips. So we just want to make sure that in your bid, you're including getting that material off-site. And that can be stuff like filter media that's vacuumed out, but it could also be the sediment that's accumulated in the sediment traps. Another important factor for a bid, and something that can add quite a bit of cost for labor, is the removal of weeds using mechanical means. So if you have to go in and cut out blackberry, that takes a lot more time, a lot more manpower than going in and just spraying blackberry. But for a stormwater facility, and especially, something like a pond or biofiltration swale, we're very focused on trying to improve the water quality. We're trying to remove the pollution. So going in and just spraying blackberry or cattails or thistle, something like that, especially in a wide area, is not going to be helpful for the water quality treatment. We really want to see mechanical removal and then kind of spot spraying, but that does take more time. And some invasive species like Himalayan blackberry have to be properly disposed of. So once you cut them out, you've got to get rid of those as solid waste. You don't want to just mulch them on site and leave that debris behind. And in your bid, you really want to think about having some documentation included. And if that means, there may be some more staff time that's used, or maybe you have to have a project manager or an account manager write up a summary, provide some record back to the owner. It's time well spent, because then that owner has the records that they need to meet the regulations that we talked about at the beginning of the presentation. The private facility owners are responsible for maintenance, and showing that proof of inspection or just an inspection log. It doesn't have to be real complicated, but adding that little bit of time to keep those records can be really important for the private property owner to comply with the regulations. So in your bid, just give some thought to that. Is that something you can do? Is it something the office needs to do? Is someone going to email it? Is it going to be, a record that you're keeping or that the owner's keeping? And ideally, we'd like the records to go back to the owner so that they can provide them as requested. So that was kind of the presentation, looking at different maintenance issues, some common misconceptions with stormwater facilities on the private side. And, we really encourage folks to visit stormwaterpartners.com. We have a ton of resources there for contractors specifically, but also for private facility owners. So if you're working with an owner who just does not know kind of the lay of the land of stormwater facilities, get them on stormwaterpartners.com. We've got videos, handouts, diagrams of a lot of facilities, our contractor list, of course, with available service providers that can help with all of these different inspection and maintenance tasks. But it's a great resource, and it's something we're using, in Southwest Washington. We're using it across all these different cities and the county. So we really want to make sure that people are checking that out, getting the information they need, and being able to connect with these resources to find out what their site needs or what their stormwater facilities may require. So if you have questions, all of our contact information is also available on there, so you can reach the cities and county. You can reach out for more information on a specific site, get the approved plans, help with bids, just get familiar with what each site is going to require, and get listed as a contractor, to be able to be a service provider. A lot of private facility owners and property managers are looking for contractors, are looking for help. So hopefully reach out to us there if you're not listed, and make sure that you're part of stormwaterpartners.com.